Cleopatra has always lived at the edge of myth and memory. She ruled a kingdom in turmoil, negotiated with Rome's most powerful men, and shaped the final chapter of ancient Egypt. Yet, for all her influence, the details of her daily life remain some of history's most intriguing missing pieces. Historians have fragments, scattered records, and archaeological clues, but no complete picture. And that absence invites a deeper question. If we could reconstruct her routines, her rituals, and the world she moved through, what would it reveal about the woman behind the legend? Stay tuned as we explore her journey through evidence, not imagination. What survived from Cleopatra's real court records? When people imagine the ancient world, they imagine papyrus scrolls stacked in royal libraries, filled with secrets, rituals, and day-to-day details of life at court. And in Cleopatra's case, the imagination tends to run wild, because she wasn't just any monarch. She was the last pharaoh of Egypt, a ruler whose intelligence, charisma, and political brilliance shaped one of the most dramatic eras in history. So the moment claims suggest that a lost scroll from her court has just been digitized, the world listens. It taps into our collective hope that somewhere out there, hidden under dust or water or stone, lies the personal voice of Cleopatra herself. But before we chase what might have survived, we need to understand what actually has. The truth is startling. Almost nothing written from Cleopatra's court made it through the centuries. And that isn't because her administration didn't produce documents. In fact, the Ptolemaic bureaucracy was one of the most paper-heavy systems of its time. Cleopatra ruled a kingdom filled with scribes, accountants, translators, temple administrators, port officials, and tax collectors. Every day, scrolls were drafted to record trade transactions, shipping logs, tax exemptions, diplomatic letters, royal decrees, and priestly communications. Her court was filled with documentation. What didn't exist was the climate to preserve it. Papyrus is fragile. The Mediterranean humidity of Alexandria is unforgiving. Wars, fires, Roman looting, earthquakes, and tsunamis only made things worse. Over 2,000 years, the grand city that Cleopatra knew, the libraries, the palaces, the treasury halls, were destroyed, submerged, or scattered. And in the aftermath, the written traces of her reign vanished with them. Out of that entire world of documentation, only a handful of items survive with any link to Cleopatra. The most famous is a royal decree in which Cleopatra added a single word in her own handwriting. It's a short Greek instruction that roughly translates to, "Let it be done." And while it's just one word, historians treasure it. It's a rare moment where Cleopatra steps out of the shadow of propaganda and myth and into our world with her own pen. Beyond that, the documents we still have are mostly administrative papyri, not personal diaries, not ritual logs, not intimate reflections. They reveal her as a ruler, not as a woman writing down her morning routines or secret thoughts. And even these surviving pieces aren't numerous. They're scattered fragments, often damaged, often incomplete. Every scrap is carefully studied because every piece matters. This is why the idea of a newly discovered daily ritual scroll feels thrilling. It would be unprecedented. It would rewrite parts of Cleopatra's life. But to understand why such a discovery is almost impossible, we need to see the reality. Cleopatra's world was documented, but the centuries were brutal to the evidence. What survives today isn't a lost ritual manuscript, it's a whisper, a tiny echo of the bureaucracy she once commanded. And that whisper forces us to lean on archaeology, cross-references, ancient accounts, and scientific reconstruction to rebuild what the written sources can no longer tell us. To understand Cleopatra, we must begin with the rhythm of her days. Because a ruler's routine is never just routine. It is strategy, symbolism, and survival woven into every hour. And while no personal diary or ritual log survives from her court, historians can piece together her daily life through Greek accounts, Egyptian temple traditions, Roman observations, and the administrative structure of the Ptolemaic dynasty she inherited. Reconstructing Cleopatra's daily rituals. Cleopatra's mornings began with purpose. As pharaoh, she wasn't simply a monarch, she was the physical embodiment of divine authority. That meant her first rituals were both political and spiritual. Historical sources describe Egyptian rulers starting their day with purification, bathing, oiling the body, applying scented unguents, and preparing themselves to be seen as both human and divine. Cleopatra's use of kohl eyeliner and perfumed oils wasn't vanity, it was royal protocol, aligning her image with centuries of Egyptian iconography. Her wardrobe carried symbolism. Certain fabrics, colors, and jewelry signified her connection to Isis, the goddess she identified with. Each detail communicated legitimacy to her subjects and intention to her court. Once prepared, Cleopatra entered the world of governance. Her mornings were filled with petitions, reports from ministers, updates on tax collections, shipment logs from Alexandria's bustling port, and news from Thebes, Memphis, and the broader Nile Valley. Egypt's economy depended heavily on grain exports, and Cleopatra was known for her sharp understanding of both domestic and international trade. Scholars note that she paid close attention to economic documents, an unusual trait for a ruler of her time, and a testament to her intellectual discipline. Language was one of her greatest tools. Unlike her Ptolemaic predecessors, Cleopatra spoke Egyptian. She also knew Greek, Latin, Hebrew, Aramaic, and possibly others. This allowed her to deal directly with diplomats and merchants without relying on translators. Meetings with ambassadors from Cyprus, Judea, or Rome weren't just political theater. They were opportunities for her to demonstrate control over the narrative. Religious duties were also part of her daily structure. As pharaoh, Cleopatra was responsible for maintaining Maat, the cosmic balance. This often meant visiting temples, making offerings, overseeing festivals, or consulting priests. At times, she led rituals herself, particularly those connected to Isis. These were not symbolic gestures. In Egyptian belief, a ruler's participation kept the universe in order. Her afternoons were a blend of diplomacy and strategy. She met with military advisors, reviewed dispatches from generals, discussed fortification projects, and stayed informed on Rome's volatile political climate. Cleopatra was not a ruler who reacted, she anticipated. Evenings were more personal, but still purposeful. She was known to engage in philosophical conversations, music, literature, and scientific inquiry. Cleopatra descended from a dynasty that valued intellectualism, and she inherited that tradition. Banquets were less indulgence and more networking, spaces where alliances were nurtured and influence reinforced. When pieced together, Cleopatra's daily rituals paint a picture far different from the seductress created by Roman propaganda. She emerged as a strategist, a linguist, a religious leader, a political architect, and a woman who understood the power of presentation. And it is within these reconstructed routines that we begin to see the real Cleopatra, disciplined, deliberate, and deeply aware of the world she was fighting to preserve. To understand what might have been written about Cleopatra's daily rituals or any aspect of her life, we have to understand what a royal scroll actually was in her time. Not the dramatic, gold-inked manuscripts imagined in movies, but the real, practical documents produced inside one of the most sophisticated bureaucracies of the ancient world. What a court scroll from Cleopatra's era would look like. A Ptolemaic court scroll was, first and foremost, a tool. It was created to record, to archive, or to instruct. Its purpose was never personal expression. Cleopatra did not sit down at a desk to pour her thoughts onto papyrus. Instead, an army of trained scribes handled that work. These men, occasionally women, were specialists. They wrote rapidly, accurately, and in whichever language the audience required. Egyptian for temple business, Greek for administrative orders, and occasionally other languages for foreign correspondence. The scroll itself began with material. Papyrus was made from reeds harvested along the Nile, split into thin strips, soaked, pressed, and dried into sheets. These sheets were glued edge to edge to form scrolls that could stretch several meters long. Ink was made from soot and gum, black for the main text, red for emphasis or sacred terminology. Scribes stood or sat cross-legged, often using a wooden palette and reed pens sharpened to precise points. So what would a scroll about rituals, or even daily routines, realistically look like? It would likely resemble a temple register, an ordered list of offerings, prayers, ceremonial sequences, or priestly responsibilities. Egyptian religious life was heavily structured, and rituals were cataloged meticulously. A royal ritual scroll wouldn't describe feelings or motivations. It would document actions, what offerings were made, in what quantity, At what time? Under which deity's authority? If a scroll connected to Cleopatra existed, it would probably follow this format. It might list her scheduled appearances at temples, her participation in specific festivals, or the symbolic acts she performed in her role as living Isis. It would also connect her political decisions to religious authority, an important part of legitimizing her reign. Another possibility is that such a scroll would be archival, detailing court expenditures, inventory of luxury items used in ceremonies, or the distribution of offerings to priestly families. Cleopatra's court was deeply intertwined with temple networks, and economic records often reflected that relationship. These wouldn't read like personal notes, they'd read like spreadsheets written in ink. Even military or diplomatic information could appear in ritual documents, because in ancient Egypt, sacred and political responsibilities weren't separate. A ritual scroll could mention a blessing for a fleet about to sail, or a ceremonial cleansing before a major diplomatic meeting. And if a scroll ever documented Cleopatra's daily rhythm, the language would still be formal, almost formulaic. It would say things like, "The mistress of Upper and Lower Egypt made the morning offering at dawn," or "The queen spoke with the council of priests concerning the rites of Isis." This was the style of her time: precise, respectful, authoritative. In other words, a real Cleopatra scroll would be practical, structured, and deeply intertwined with governance and religion. Understanding this helps us ground our imagination. If we ever do uncover a scroll from her court, we know exactly what shape it would take, and what it would reveal would be subtle, but invaluable. On the windswept Mediterranean coast of Egypt, west of Alexandria, sits a ruined temple complex that has drawn more attention in the last 20 years than nearly any other site connected to Cleopatra. Taposiris Magna, the most important Cleopatra site excavated. Taposiris Magna, its name meaning the Great Tomb of Osiris, was once a bustling religious center, home to priests, festivals, and royal ceremonies. But today it's famous for something else entirely. It may hold the final missing pieces of Cleopatra's story. When archaeologists first turned serious attention to the site, they weren't hoping to find a royal tomb. They were looking for clues about Ptolemaic religious life and how rulers like Cleopatra used temple networks to reinforce their authority. But the deeper they dug, the more interesting the site became. Beneath collapsed stone and drifting sand, they found tunnels, chambers, and evidence of rituals that pointed to a place far more significant than previously believed. One of the strongest reasons Cleopatra may have been tied to Taposiris Magna is the temple's dedication to Osiris and Isis, the divine pair that mirrored her political image. Cleopatra was closely associated with Isis, not just in symbolic rituals, but in public festivals, political propaganda, and her relationship with the priesthood. Any temple tied to Isis automatically held political meaning for her. And this particular temple was one of the last major centers of traditional Egyptian religion during her lifetime. Excavations uncovered coins bearing Cleopatra's face, pottery from her era, and inscriptions referencing the religious activities that took place under her reign. None of these guarantee she personally walked through the temple's halls, but they confirm one thing: this was a site of active political and spiritual significance during her rule. It was a place where her presence, direct or indirect, mattered. The most dramatic discovery, however, wasn't a statue or inscription. It was a network of underground passages running beneath the main temple. Some chambers showed signs of ritual use. Others appeared untouched for centuries. Archaeologists began to wonder whether these tunnels might have served a more sacred purpose, perhaps even as part of a burial or ceremonial complex linked to the final moments of Egypt's last pharaoh. It's important to be clear, no evidence has confirmed that Cleopatra was buried here. Egyptian burial customs were shifting by her time, and Roman intervention after her death complicates the picture. Still, the site's layout matches the kind of symbolic architecture associated with Osiris, resurrection, and kingship. If any place outside Alexandria could have held something connected to Cleopatra's final days, Taposiris Magna ranks high on the list. But beyond theories, the site has already given us something invaluable: context. The artifacts found here, the architecture of the temple, and the religious symbols carved into its walls help historians reconstruct the world Cleopatra moved through. a world where religion was politics, where rituals reinforced power, and where temples like Taposiris Magna shaped the identity of a queen determined to hold Egypt together. In the search for Cleopatra, the site isn't just a dig, it's a bridge to her reality. Not the legend, not the image sculpted by Roman writers, but the Egypt she was trying desperately to protect. Why Cleopatra must have chosen Taposiris Magna. Cleopatra's connection to Taposiris Magna wasn't accidental. Every move she made was calculated, and every location she touched carried both spiritual and political significance. The temple's dedication to Osiris, the god of resurrection and the underworld, and Isis, the goddess she closely identified with, made it more than just a religious site. It was a symbol of her claim to divine authority and the continuity of Egyptian kingship. In ancient Egypt, rulers didn't separate the sacred from the political. Every festival, every ritual offering, every public appearance reinforced the pharaoh's legitimacy. For Cleopatra, aligning herself with Isis wasn't mere theater, it was a statement. She was the living embodiment of the goddess, the rightful queen of a land struggling to maintain independence against Rome's rising power. Choosing Taposiris Magna as a central site in her kingdom sent a message. This was her spiritual and political stronghold. Archaeological evidence supports this connection. Excavations have uncovered hundreds of coins bearing Cleopatra's likeness, often alongside inscriptions referencing religious rites. Statues and carvings reflect the symbolism of Isis and Osiris intertwined with the queen's image. Even the architecture itself, temple columns, sanctuaries, and underground chambers, was designed to reflect divine order. It's easy to see how a ruler who understood the power of symbolism could use this space to reinforce her authority. Some scholars believe that Cleopatra's ties to Taposiris Magna may have extended beyond religious oversight. The presence of underground chambers and tunnels beneath the temple suggests that parts of the complex were set aside for more private or sacred purposes. While there is no definitive proof that Cleopatra was buried here, the combination of religious, political, and symbolic factors makes the site a plausible candidate for her final resting place. Its alignment with Osiris, its distance from the chaos of Alexandria, and its active role during her reign all fit the profile of a queen who understood both strategy and symbolism. Moreover, Taposiris Magna was connected to trade and administration. The nearby harbor would have made it a hub for economic activity, reinforcing Cleopatra's ability to oversee both spiritual and material wealth. In a kingdom where legitimacy was tied to prosperity, a temple complex that combined sacred rituals with access to resources would have been invaluable. Cleopatra's genius was in recognizing these connections between faith, politics, and economy, and using them to consolidate her power. Even without a discovered tomb, Taposiris Magna teaches us about Cleopatra's priorities. She wasn't simply a figure of myth or romance. She was a ruler who understood the interplay between religion, symbolism, and political authority. Every coin, chamber, and ritual artifact found here offers a glimpse into how she maintained control, inspired loyalty, and projected divine legitimacy across her kingdom. In a sense, Taposiris Magna is more than just a historical site, it's a lens into the mind of one of history's most remarkable rulers. It helps us understand the careful choices behind her public image, her devotion to religion, and the strategic thinking that kept Egypt independent for as long as possible. And in doing so, it brings us closer to the Cleopatra who lived and ruled, not the one imagined by later storytellers. Cleopatra's final days. The real mysteries found. The story of Cleopatra's final days is veiled in both intrigue and uncertainty. History remembers the drama of Rome's rise, the fall of her allies, and the collapse of her kingdom. But the exact details of how Egypt's last pharaoh met her end remain a question that continues to captivate historians. This is the real mystery, far more compelling than any imagined lost scroll. By 30 BCE, Cleopatra's world had changed dramatically. Julius Caesar had long been gone, and the political landscape was dominated by Octavian, the future Augustus. Cleopatra had placed her hopes in her alliance with Mark Antony, a general who was both her political partner and her lover. Together, they sought to resist Rome's growing influence, but Antony's forces were no match for Octavian's disciplined army. Following the naval defeat at Actium, their hopes crumbled. Antony retreated to Alexandria, wounded both in body and spirit, and soon after, he took his own life. Cleopatra was left to confront the inevitability of her kingdom's fate alone. Ancient historians describe her as calm, calculating, and deeply aware of the symbolism in her own actions. She faced a conqueror who would not tolerate a rival queen. She knew that surrender could mean humiliation, imprisonment, or execution. Every decision she made at this point was strategic, balancing survival, dignity, and legacy. Accounts of her death are famously dramatic, and for centuries, the story of the ASP, the venomous snake, capturing Cleopatra's imagination, has dominated popular culture. According to these sources, she allowed herself to be bitten to preserve her autonomy in the face of conquest. Other accounts suggest poison, applied via comb, cup, or ointment, as the instrument of her choice. What is consistent, however, is that she orchestrated her own exit, ensuring that her life ended on her own terms rather than in the hands of Rome. Even after her death, Cleopatra's burial became a mystery. Octavian, consolidating power over Egypt, never recorded the location of her tomb. Alexandria, already damaged by centuries of earthquakes and floods, offered no clear preservation of royal burial sites. Whatever markers may have existed were lost to history. Scholars continue to debate whether she was buried alongside Antony in a temple of Isis or in a hidden location designed to honor her status as a pharaoh and goddess alike. Her final days highlight her unique combination of intellect, political acumen, and ritual awareness. Cleopatra understood the power of symbolism. She knew that her death would be remembered not merely as an event, but as a statement about authority, independence, and divine status. That calculated awareness makes her final moments historically significant, even if the precise details remain elusive. It is this unresolved chapter, the mystery of Cleopatra's death and her lost tomb, that has fascinated historians for millennia. Unlike myths of secret diaries or ritual scrolls, this is real history, an intersection of politics, war, religion, and human will. And while the details may never be fully uncovered, each archaeological discovery, each coin, each fragment of temple architecture brings us closer to understanding the woman who ruled Egypt with intelligence, courage, and unmatched strategy in the face of an empire. Cleopatra's story did not survive history untouched. Much of what we know, or think we know, about her comes not from her own words, but from the pens of Roman historians, many of whom had political reasons to cast her in a particular light. Understanding how Rome shaped and in many ways erased evidence about Cleopatra is key to separating myth from reality. How Rome erased evidence of Cleopatra. After her death in 30 BCE, Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus, consolidated Rome's control over Egypt. Cleopatra was no longer a queen. She became a symbol of resistance against Rome. As was common in Roman politics, her image was systematically rewritten to serve the victor. Writers like Plutarch, Cassius Dio, and later Roman poets emphasized her seduction, her luxury, and her supposed manipulations of men rather than her intelligence, political skill, or administrative genius. These accounts were often exaggerated, designed to justify Rome's conquest and to warn future generations about the dangers of powerful women. Physical evidence suffered as well. Alexandria, the jewel of Egypt, had been the site of repeated sieges, fires, and later earthquakes. The libraries, administrative buildings, and royal quarters, all possible sources of Cleopatra's personal records, were destroyed or looted. Temples were repurposed, statues smashed or taken to Rome, and any artifacts that survived were scattered or buried. The city's shifting geography, combined with centuries of neglect, further ensured that much of her material legacy was lost. Roman propaganda went beyond destruction of buildings. It shaped memory itself. Coins bearing Cleopatra's image were melted down or reissued with Octavian's face. Any inscriptions that celebrated her reign or described her accomplishments were defaced, The very narrative of her life became a tool for Rome to assert dominance, turning Cleopatra into a cautionary tale rather than a ruler in her own right. Even her burial was likely affected. If she had been interred in Alexandria, Roman oversight would have prevented the display of her tomb or any monuments that might inspire resistance. The secrecy surrounding her final resting place may have been deliberate, a final act of political erasure. In this way, Cleopatra's death did not simply end her life, it marked the beginning of the slow disappearance of her physical and documentary legacy. What modern archaeologists are actually discovering. While myths and legends capture the imagination, the real work of uncovering Cleopatra's world happens slowly, methodically, and scientifically. Modern archaeologists are giving us the clearest picture yet of the Egypt she ruled. A world of temples, bustling ports, elaborate tombs, and religious rituals. And each discovery brings us closer to understanding her life, her reign, and the environment in which she made her decisions. One of the most significant advances has been at sites like Taposiris Magna. Excavations over the last 2 decades have uncovered coins bearing Cleopatra's face, statues, inscriptions, and ceremonial objects. These finds reveal that temples were more than religious centers. They were hubs of power, wealth, and administration. Underground chambers and tunnels hint at secretive or sacred activities that could be tied to the last pharaoh's rituals or even the burial practices of elite individuals of the era. Underwater archaeology has also reshaped our understanding of Alexandria and its harbor. Sunken structures, anchors, and amphorae show how the city functioned as a hub of Mediterranean trade. Cleopatra's reign coincided with a period of economic sophistication, and these findings underscore her ability to oversee commerce and maintain Egypt's influence across the Mediterranean. Every recovered artifact, whether a fragment of pottery or a carved stone, adds layers of detail to the political and cultural world she navigated. Modern technology has accelerated discoveries even further. Satellite imaging and geophysical surveys allow archaeologists to locate buried structures without excavation, while LiDAR mapping and 3D modeling reconstruct sites in digital space. Papyrus fragments can now be scanned and preserved digitally, giving scholars access to texts that might otherwise crumble to dust. These methods are giving researchers unprecedented insights into Egypt's Ptolemaic period and Cleopatra's daily life, governance, and ceremonial practices. Yet these discoveries are also humbling. They remind us of how much has been lost. Even with advanced technology, the fragments that survive are often small and isolated. Coins may bear her image, but inscriptions may only hint at her decisions. A single temple column may reveal religious priorities, but cannot tell us her private thoughts or her personal routines. Every piece is a clue, not a complete answer. But in combination, these fragments tell a story of Cleopatra as a strategic, intelligent, and culturally aware ruler. She was deeply involved in religion, diplomacy, and economic affairs. She understood the interplay between power, symbolism, and administration. And while nothing yet reveals the intimate details of her daily rituals, these discoveries allow us to reconstruct a life of discipline, strategy, and public performance, the real Cleopatra behind the legend. Ultimately, modern archaeology demonstrates that the truth about Cleopatra's reign is both richer and more complex than any scroll or story might suggest. Even as archaeology reveals the real Cleopatra, myths continue to flourish. Among the most persistent is the idea of a lost scroll containing her daily rituals or secret thoughts. While no such scroll has ever been found, the appeal of this fantasy speaks to something deeper about our fascination with her. The desire to access a private world of power, mystery, and sophistication. Why myth about scroll keep emerging? Cleopatra has always been a figure of legend, her life retold through the lens of Roman writers who emphasize seduction and intrigue over intellect and governance. Over centuries, storytellers, artists, and filmmakers have amplified these narratives, transforming her into a symbol as much as a historical figure. A lost scroll fits perfectly into this narrative. It promises hidden knowledge, secret rituals, and a direct connection to the queen herself. Technology and media also play a role. Digital reconstruction, AI-generated imagery, and sensational headlines give the impression that long-lost artifacts could suddenly appear. While these tools are invaluable for research, they can also blur the line between fact and fiction for the general public. It's easy to see why the myth of a lost scroll captivates the imagination. It's plausible enough to be believable, mysterious enough to be alluring, and appealing enough to inspire wonder. Yet despite the myths, we must remember what survives. Coins, inscriptions, temple architecture, and administrative documents provide a far more reliable, though fragmented, insight into her life. Cleopatra's intelligence, diplomacy, and religious authority are preserved not in a single magical document, but across a wide range of evidence, waiting to be interpreted. The myth of the scroll, while compelling, is ultimately a reflection of our fascination with her, rather than a reflection of historical reality. Interestingly, these myths also highlight the limitations of historical knowledge. Cleopatra's reign is one of the best documented in terms of surviving artifacts, yet so many details of her personal life are missing. The gaps in the record invite speculation, giving rise to fantasies of hidden scrolls, secret diaries, and forgotten rituals. In a sense, the myths are a mirror, showing both the gaps in history and the enduring allure of one of its most enigmatic figures. In the end, the persistence of the lost scroll legend reminds us that history and storytelling are intertwined. Cleopatra's life can never be fully captured, but every discovery, every fragment, every scholarly insight allows us to reconstruct her world with increasing clarity. The myths themselves, fascinating though they are, cannot replace the evidence, yet they reveal just how enduring her legacy is and how much humanity continues to yearn for a closer connection to a queen who once ruled Egypt with unmatched skill and brilliance. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe and click on the next video shown on your screen.